DND number 5, Angels in Jesus' Name, Chapter 4. He wore only a pair of sweats, one leg seam opened to the knee. Sweat from his body, his arms and chest muscles burned, but he didn't stop. He had to get back in tune with his body in order to be at his best to protect his girls, as he'd come to think of the Anderson family. Push-ups, crunches, stretches, that's all he had to work with right now. He stopped when his phone went off. "Yeah," Keegan said, breathing hard. "Keeg, I still get a thrill out of hearing your voice," John said. "I'm so glad to make that happen for you. You know, it wasn't just your family grieving. I grieved for a friend, too. So did Caleb and Braden and Tristan." Keegan sighed, thinking of his war buddies. All special ops with him, working covert missions, dangerous missions. They were a team. They had each other's backs in Afghanistan and Iraq, and they still did. "I suppose I need to get in touch with them. Well, I hope I'm not about to piss you off, but I already did. They're available if we need them." "I should have known you would do that." "So," John said, effectively changing the subject, "what did my good friend Jason Lee have to say?" "Well, I talked to him yesterday, and I tell you, John, I understand why he comes so highly recommended. I have to say, though, speaking to him was kind of weird." "Weird?" "Yeah, he was like so friendly it was almost surreal." John chuckled. "That's that God is love metaphysical thing he's got going. It's like a thing all the Keno students get into." "I never got that vibe from you." "Well, I was in Iraq when I met you, and I was trying to suppress my innate goodness so I could fit in with the rest of you tough guys," John joked. "Anyway, so what did he have to say?" "Well, first, I was reluctant to discuss things over the phone, but he rattled off all this technical jargon and assured me he would know if we were being tapped into. Then he was so quiet while I explained the situation to him, I had to check the phone to make sure I hadn't lost a signal. Once he understood the situation, he drilled me for details. He offered to investigate who blew my cover. He said if I let him take care of that, I could concentrate on what I needed to do to complete the mission. He understood completely why I feel I can't leave the Anderson home now, and even agreed that once I'd been here a week, there was no leaving them. He had solutions and ideas at the ready. The guy is sharp. "I'm telling you, Keegan, his operation is top-notch, high-tech stuff. He's the best," John said. "He's also expensive as hell, but you get what you pay for." "Well, I'll come up with the money. The lives of this family are at stake. Anyway, like I said, I'm amazed at the services he offered, at the lengths he would go. He's going to listen in on conversations of the organization and is sure he will have some pertinent information for me soon. I asked if he needed an inside man in order to set that up, and he said it wasn't necessary, so that means he's got the stuff, man. He's also sending a top agent to help me retrieve the evidence." "Well, that part I know. His name is Jeff Davis. He's good. He's a deadly sharpshooter. He reminds me a lot of you in that way. He's been with Ameritech 5 or 6 years, I think. I'm picking him up at the airport tomorrow night, and then we're headed to your place." "I told you I didn't want you involved, except for one small, relatively non-lethal mission I need you for." "Do you really think you can make that decision for me?" "Well, what about Jody?" "Jody would want me to do what I think is right, no matter what, and she and I both believe a friend in need should be top priority." "I won't let you put yourself in danger." "Okay, whatever. Anyway, I've got everything you asked for. Can't wait to hear the rest of the story. If you need anything else before I arrive tomorrow, you know how to reach me." "Fine then. I'll see you tomorrow." "You can count on it." Keegan tossed his phone on the bed. It wouldn't be long now. Things were coming to a head. The evidence would be turned in. Senator Hartman would be called before a grand jury, along with Anthony Salados and Victor Washington, for the murders of 29 men, women, and children, and for the abductions of more than 200 babies. Hartman will go down for treason. At least Keegan hoped he would. On a lesser note, he'd know who the leak was in his own department, and what seems to have become the most important. Elizabeth and her girls would be safe. He smiled at the thought of her, As he's come to know her over the last few weeks, he's realized she's much more than just a pretty face. To be so young and have so much responsibility and to handle it so well says much about her character. She doesn't complain about what has to be done. She just does it. And with a smile on her face, she accepts life as it's thrown at her and gives of herself to others without reservation. She truly is an angel. She's steadfast in her Christian beliefs. She gets the girls all dressed up and leads them to church every Sunday, like a mother goose leading her young. She prays all the time. He knows because there's been several times he's accidentally come upon her on her knees in the den after everyone is in bed. She quotes scripture. She's even taught him about God. She teaches by example and makes him want to be a better man. She makes him feel like God is real. But how could he be? If he's real, then how can he let such bad things happen in this world? But she doesn't feel that way. She says to trust him and keep an open mind. God has a different perspective. Keegan thought about the way he thinks about Elizabeth and wondered what God thinks about that. The way she makes him feel, makes him want to make her happy. What's more, her reaction to his advances blows him away. She's so honest about her feelings and so open to new experiences, even though he recently had a glimpse of some shyness, or maybe she was just a little frightened in unfamiliar territory. He shook his head. One day, she's telling him she wants him. The next, she's shy and timid. Sighing, he tried to clear his mind of her and went back to his workout. The doorknob, turning slowly, had Keegan looking up. Elizabeth eased into the room, her eyes big, her smile in place. 1 minute, he said as he finished his count. When he got to 50, he stopped and pushed himself up into a standing position. Hi, he said. Hey. He waited for her to tell him why she came to his room, and when she didn't, he sat down in the rocker and drank from a bottle of water. Is everything okay, Elizabeth? She nodded and moved toward him. He watched her, noted how she bit on her lower lip, how her hands twisted together. Her eyes remained on his. Did the girls go to bed without any problems? He asked. Again she nodded. She came to a halt right in front of him. Keegan swallowed. What was she up to now? She leaned down and placed a soft kiss on his lips. To what do I owe this honor? He asked softly. She gave a slight shrug. I guess I was feeling a little lonely. He stood and took her face in his hands and kissed her. She ran her hands over his chest and down to his waist. Immediately he placed his hands over hers to stop her. What are you doing, sweetheart? She smiled at him. I would think that would be obvious. Not that he wasn't fascinated by what could be going through her head. He couldn't let her go any further with whatever she had planned. He brought her hands up to his lips and kissed them. What are you up to, Elizabeth? She frowned. I'm not sure. I just felt like I needed to see you. I needed to touch you. Not a good idea. She frowned. I thought you would want me to. Oh, I would. I do. But the answer is no. You don't want me to touch you? It's not that. Then what? She playfully ran her hands over his chest again. Stop. Brow furrowed, she looked up at him. Why? Did I do something wrong? No, nothing wrong in my book, but plenty wrong in your book. Besides, I don't have any protection for you right now. Well, I wasn't planning on taking things that far. We won't need protection. Yes, we will. No, you don't understand. It's you who doesn't understand. We will need protection. But I won't let it get to that point, she said earnestly. He laughed. You won't have a choice. Are you saying you'd force me? I won't have to force you. I don't understand, baby. When you put your hands on me, it makes me want you, and then I will make you unable to say anything but yes. Well, you're awfully sure of yourself, aren't you? No, yes, he sighed. It's just that you're very innocent, and I will seduce you, and I seem to have no control when it comes to you. Well, then fine, seduce me. I don't care. He leaned forward. And that My sweet, sweet Elizabeth is why you have 5 children. Her face colored. Standing, she turned and headed for the door. He jumped up and grabbed her, pulling her to him, her hands pressed against his chest in resistance. Wait, wait, hold on. I didn't mean that as an insult, I swear. I've never been good at holding back my words, and I just say what I think. I say what I feel, but you have to understand. I want protection for you because I care about you. I've never cared before. Never. I don't want to hurt you. I care about you, Elizabeth. When she continued trying to push him away, he gripped her tighter, giving her a little shake. Do you hear what I'm saying? I care about you. I want you. I want to make love to you. She calmed, her eyes blinking up at him, seemingly in slow motion. You care about me? I do. Very much. She leaned her forehead against him. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have come to you. I know better. I'm so embarrassed. I feel so silly. Well, I don't think it was silly at all. If you feel for me anywhere near what I feel for you, then that makes me happy. So it wasn't silly. It was loving, he smiled, and a little bit naughty. She smiled back at him, grateful for the way he lightened up the moment. It was, wasn't it? Yes, it was. And one day I'm coming after you, but it will be when it's right. I'll be waiting, she said firmly as she turned and left the room. The moment the door closed, Keegan sank down in the chair. She's changed him. A beautiful woman practically threw herself at him, and he turned her down. The angel was making a choir boy out of him. New scene. Saturday morning brought a smile to Keegan's lips. He'd risen early, worked out, showered, dressed, and was headed toward the kitchen for breakfast without his crutches to eat with 6 of his favorite people. He could hear the girls giggling. He could hear Elizabeth's soft voice teasing them. Stopping in the hall just outside the kitchen, he listened, a smile on his face. And you're going to drink so much milk, Lizzie said. Finally, you're going to just fall on the floor, holding your tummy and moan, oh, milk. And when the paramedics are going to come and say, and then the paramedics are going to come and say, little girl, what's the matter with you? And you're going to say, milk. And they're going to say, oh, you want some milk? And they'll give you some more milk. And you'll just keep right on moaning. And then they'll take you to the hospital. And the doctor will ask, what's wrong with you, little girl? And you'll say, milk. And the doctor will say, oh, you want some milk? And then he'll give you some more milk. And you know what will happen then? What? Violet said, giggling. You're gonna explode. And then there will be milk all over the hospital. It'll be on the floors and on the walls. People will slip and fall in the puddles of milk and break their legs and arms, all because one little girl drank too much milk. All 5 girls were laughing, and Keegan thought he'd died and gone to heaven. It was such a beautiful sound. He stepped around the corner and entered the kitchen. Good morning, ladies, he said cheerfully. Good morning, Mr. Mite, the girls all said. Good morning, Lizzie said softly, her eyes shining. The girls all became quiet as they waited for him to play the game that they'd played every day for the past week. He sighed dramatically. Let me see. He pointed at Rose. You're Lily. Rose giggled. Oh, yeah, that's right. He swung his finger toward Heather. You're Lily. Heather put her hands on her hips. No. He went on pointing at each girl until finally he landed on the real Lily. Then you must be Lily, he said. I should have known that. You look just like a lily. She smiled up at him. You don't know who the rest of us are, Heather said, urging him on. Oh, yeah? I bet I do. I bet you don't, she said, grinning. If I get all your names right, then you have to do something for me. Okay? What? You have to sing me that song that I heard you singing the other day when you got home from school, the one about the scary pumpkin. Okay. Okay, then. Here goes. I'm going to go fast, so pay attention. He began with Heather and went quickly around the table. You're Heather, you're Rose, you're Violet, you're Daisy, and you're Lily. He folded his arms across his chest. I win. Lizzie beamed at him, amazed that he really did know all their names. How do you tell the twins apart? She asked. He shrugged. I'm very attuned to detail. Rose's eyes are a tad lighter than Violet's, and Violet's hair is more wavy than Rose's. Lily, aside from her quieter demeanor, is slightly smaller and thinner than Daisy. That's very good. I'm impressed. Really? Well, then maybe I can win points by also telling you that I know you've already washed 2 loads of clothes this morning, and that you're going to the grocery store today, and that some little girl has already been naughty this morning. I'm going to guess Rose, and that I know you haven't had a chance to shower yet. Smiling, she looked into his eyes, wondering who this man really is. Okay, I'm a sucker. So how did you know all those things? Well, the washer is running and so is the dryer, so that one was easy. There's a partial grocery list lying on the counter. The timeout chair is turned facing the wall. That it was Rose is only an educated guess. And you have blue marker on your chest from when Rose wrote on you last night. Are you magic? Heather asked. Yes. Yes, I am, he said with a wink. Lizzie glanced down at the mark just above her left breast, then back up at Mike. She rose. Let me get your breakfast. Sit. I'll get it myself, he said, moving quickly. He hobbled around the kitchen in his walking cast and reappeared at her side with the coffee pot to freshen her cup. She looked up, surprised. What? He asked. I'm just not used to being waited on. I know, he said quietly as he turned back to the counter and filled his own cup. Quickly he piled eggs, biscuits, and grits onto his plate and placed it on the table, then grabbed the timeout chair and sat. He smiled at the girls, who always seemed to be watching him. Mouthful of eggs, he sighed. Has anyone ever told you that you're a great cook? He asked. Not really, but thanks, she said. I enjoy cooking. It shows. He turned to Heather. Well, I don't hear my song. Heather giggled and started singing. Keegan closed his eyes, listening as he waved his fork in the air, keeping time to the music. When she was done, he opened his eyes. That was beautiful, he said. His eyes wandered to Lizzie as they usually did. She was smiling at him. Elizabeth, I hope you don't mind, but I have some people who want to come and visit me this evening. They should be here about 5. No, why would I mind? Well, it is your house. It's fine for you to have company, Mike, and it's really not any of my business. But who is it that's coming to see you? My cousin and a friend of his. We have some business to discuss. Well, maybe they'd like to stay for dinner. He smiled. I'm sure they would love that, if it's not an inconvenience for you. Oh, I'd love to have them, she said, her eyes dancing. And I promise not to interfere with your business. I was going to the grocery store anyway, and as you've already pointed out, I'll pick up something special. That would be great, but you have to let me pay. She frowned. That's not necessary. Please, Elizabeth. Otherwise, I'll feel all guilty and I won't be able to enjoy myself. She sighed. Well, since you put it that way, I guess I can't refuse, but I'm warning you, I think I'll do it up big. You do whatever you want. I'm still paying. Fine. Her brow furrowed as she thought. I think I'll do lasagna. Yes, lasagna. And maybe I'll bake a pie. Well, 2 pies with this crowd. Oh, this is going to be fun. She rose from the table. Okay, girls, finish up your breakfast, please. We have a lot to do today. Rooms need to be cleaned, laundry finished. She turned around, staring at the kitchen. I need to mop the kitchen floor, and the house needs to be dusted. And I need to scrub the bathrooms. Elizabeth, you don't need to do all that just because these guys are coming. They won't care or even notice stuff like that. Well, I care, and I'll notice. Her eyes darkened with worry. I need to find something to wear that's not so old and worn looking. Oh, and what can I do with my hair? And she motioned toward the children. Girls, you're not eating. Come on, let's get a move on. Keegan stood and took hold of Lizzie's hand. Hey, slow down a minute. Face flushed, Lizzie looked up into Keegan's face. I have a lot to do. I'm beginning to think I shouldn't have told you that they were coming. I've never seen you so flustered. Well, first of all, if you hadn't told me they were coming, I'd probably end up very mad at you. And second, I'm not flustered, she said indignantly. I'm excited. I haven't had company here in this house since my mother's funeral, and before that it was Bradley's funeral. This is much more pleasant, and I'm looking forward to it. He brushed his hand over her cheek, then bent down and kissed it. The girls giggled, and Keegan turned to them with a smile. What? You think it's funny that I kissed your mom on her cheek? Well, then I guess I'll just have to get all of you. He dashed around the table, kissing each fat cheek, making big smooching sounds, and the girls shrieked with laughter. Lizzie watched, first with delight, but then she realized this was a very bad thing. Her girls were getting way too attached to Michael Moreland, and so was she. They all were being set up for a huge heartbreak. Yet what could she do? It was already too late. She had to steel herself for the time when he would literally walk out of their lives. Sighing, she put her mind to matters at hand. Okay, giggle boxes, clear your places and get dressed. We have to get to the store. Well, why don't you let the girls stay home with me? Keegan offered. It would make it so much easier for you to do the shopping, and then, if you wanted to, you could swing by the mall and pick up something new to wear. My treat. When she went to turn him down, he stopped her, putting a finger to her lips. Please, Elizabeth, you've done so much for me, and now you're entertaining my friends. Please, just let me do this for you. Please. I don't know what to say. Just say, okay. Wringing her hand, she looked over at the girls who were clearing their dishes the best they could. She turned back to him, and worry in her eyes. I can take care of the girls just fine, he reassured her. We'll get started doing the cleaning. It'll be okay. Her lips pressed together. Well, I guess it'll be all right. The girls can stay with you. Yay! The girls cheered. Promise me you'll be good and listen to Mr. Mike, Lizzie cautioned. We promise, Heather answered for all. Lizzie noticed Heather didn't seem to be afraid this time that her mother wouldn't come home. Okay, Mike, Lizzie said. It's all you. Good luck. He grinned. Thanks. I'll be fine. You be careful. I will. She smiled excitedly. I almost don't know what to do first. Thank you, Mike. Really. Thank you so much. She threw her arms around his neck and hugged him. He so didn't want to let her go, he thought as he squeezed her tight, and finally he set her away. Go. Grinning, she turned and rushed from the room. Keegan turned to face the troops. Okay, Flowers, let's get moving. We're going to surprise your mom and get everything done before she gets home. 5 pairs of bright blue eyes blinked up at him, and he smiled. These tiny little replicas of Lizzie were casting a spell on him, and there was nothing he could do to get out of it. He could only succumb. Clearing his mind, he started giving orders. New scene. Freshly showered and shaved, Keegan stood in front of the mirror, combing his hair. He wore a black t-shirt and a pair of jeans with one leg slit open. There wasn't much else to choose from. The house smelled wonderful. Elizabeth was cooking lasagna. He tried to help, but she would have none of that. Smiling, he thought of how pleased she'd been when she returned from her shopping trip to find the house shining to her satisfaction. She'd been impressed that a mere man could accomplish that and take care of the girls, too. He'd been pretty proud of himself. She had been happy and animated all day, so it was a surprise when Heather knocked on his door, saying that she was worried about her mom because she was upset. Keegan was pushed out of his room and toward Elizabeth's bedroom door. Okay, I'm going, he whispered to Heather. Go take care of your sisters and don't let them mess anything up. Heather nodded and scooted away with a smile on her face. Come in, Lizzie called when Keegan knocked on her door. He entered the room and came to an abrupt halt. Elizabeth stood in front of her dresser, her hands behind her neck, trying to fasten the catch of a necklace. She wore a soft pink and white floral print skirt that flared out, ending a few inches above her knee, paired with a soft pink sweater that crisscrossed under her breasts as if it were simply wrapped around her. His eyes traveled down to the little bit of thigh that showed, then to the backs of her knees, then down her well-muscled calves. He didn't know what you call the kind of shoes she wore, other than they were pink and had high heels, and they made his mouth go dry. He commanded his feet to move forward. Coming up behind her, he brushed her hands away. Let me do that, he whispered. Easily closing the tiny clasp, he leaned forward and pressed a kiss to the nape of her neck. You look beautiful. Thank you. She smiled at him in the mirror. Freshly shaven, he smelled of soap and spice, and her eyes moved over his thickly muscled chest and arms. The black t-shirt hugged his broad shoulders and tucked into jeans that hung low on his hips. Her eyes strayed over him, but she caught herself and went back to his face. He'd been watching her. She could feel her face turn red with embarrassment. Choosing to ignore her scrutiny of him, he smiled. Heather said you were upset. Her brow wrinkling, she shook her head. No, I'm not upset. Heather is such a little worrier. If I'm anything, it's maybe a little anxious. Still looking at her in the mirror, he placed his hands on her shoulders. Well, don't be. These guys are not hard to please, and if dinner tastes anything like it smells, they won't ever want to leave. Lizzie turned to face him. Well, thanks for the encouragement. I guess I'd better go see what the girls are up to. Well, first, let me just do this, he said, taking her hands and placing them behind his neck. Lowering his head, his finger tilted her chin up, and he brushed his lips over hers. The sound of a car pulling into the drive had him backing away. That must be them. Keegan clunked toward the front door in his boot and opened it. John Apple rushed up the porch steps and crushed Keegan in a bear hug. Man, I can't tell you how good it is to see you alive. Thanks, John. He turned to Lizzie, who was standing in the hall behind him. John, this is Elizabeth Anderson, my salvation. Elizabeth, my cousin, John. She extended her hand, a genuine smile on her face. It's so very nice to meet you. Please call me Lizzie. Everyone else does. Lizzie it is, then. John turned to Jeff. Mike, this is a good friend of mine, Jeff Davis. Jeff, my cousin, Mike Moreland, and apparently his salvation, Lizzie. Keegan shook Jeff's hand, nodding. Any friend of John's is a friend of mine. Lizzie held her hand out to Jeff. If a man could be called beautiful, that would be this man, Lizzie thought. He looked like some kind of golden god. Tall, built, blonde hair that looked to be streaked by the sun, large green eyes, and a killer smile. She smiled at him, a bit hypnotized by his looks. Jeff took her hand. It's a pleasure to meet you, Lizzie. Dare I be so bold as to say something smells delicious? She grinned. Why, thank you. Please, you two come in. I'm hoping you'll stay for dinner. I have lasagna and salad and my special apple pie. Oh, we'd be crazy not to, Jeff said. He stepped through the door. What a great old house, Lizzie, he said. After dinner, I hope you'll show me around. I've always been into old architecture, especially homes built around the turn of the century. I'd love to, Lizzie beamed. Keegan's eyes narrowed as he and John brought up the rear. John watched his friend and was fascinated by the look on Keegan's face, which could only be construed as jealousy. Deciding to test his theory, John leaned close. That is one amazing-looking woman. Keegan glanced over at him. Yes, she is. There's a lot more to her than her looks, though. John nodded. You've got it bad, don't you? He said quietly. Keegan sighed and nodded. She's the one. I just need to get out of the fix I'm in so I can level with her. Well, getting you out of the fix is going to be rough, but we'll do it. Leveling with her, I think you may discover, is going to be a lot harder. You might be right, Keegan agreed. He nodded toward Jeff. What's with this Romeo? Are you sure we can trust him? John grinned. The green monster. Never thought I'd see the day. Don't let his sweet-talking act fool you. Jeff is completely professional. He's here to do a job, and believe me, he has nothing on his mind but that. He's asking to be shown the house so that he can ascertain the setup. If you weren't so smitten, you'd realize that. Trust him, Mike. Jason wouldn't let you down. Keegan nodded. I don't really have a choice, do I? Nope. John grinned as he put his arm around him. Man, it's good to see you alive. Let's try and keep it that way. Making their way back to the kitchen, 5 little girls came running to see Keegan, but stopped short when they saw the 2 large men standing next to him. John immediately got down on their level. Well, hello there. Hi, Heather said. I'm Heather, and I'm the oldest, and these are my sisters. Do you want me to tell you their names? Sure. You don't have to tell my name, Rose said sharply. I can say my own name. She looked up at John. I'm Rose. John smiled. Hello, Rose. And I'm Violet. John greeted Violet. And this is Daisy. She's 3. And this is Lily. She's 3 too, Heather said. Wow. I don't think I'll ever remember everyone, John teased. Mr. Mike remembers us. He's magic. John eyed his friend. Yes, I believe he is. Mike, would you mind putting the extension in the table? It's in the hall closet, Lizzie asked sweetly. Sure, he said, turning to fetch the piece. Let me help, Crip, John said. Everyone pitched in to set the table, even though Lizzie kept trying to shoo the men away, and finally she was able to usher the men into the family room, where she served them wine and bruschetta, and while they enjoyed the appetizer, she headed back to the kitchen to finish the salad and get the bread out of the oven. Look, guys, Keegan said, I know we need to get down to business, but she was so excited about having some company, I couldn't discourage her. No problem, Jeff said. It's a sticky situation. You know the best way to handle things. I'm here for you. You set the agenda. Keegan nodded. Thanks for that. As soon as we can break away, we'll go in my room. You're not going to believe what I'm going to tell you. And I'm frustrated as hell that I haven't been able to unload it on anyone yet. I just didn't know who to trust. Understandable. A lot of innocent lives are at stake. At stake. John and Jeff nodded. Mommy says to come to the table, Heather said as she ran into the room. We're on our way, Keegan answered. They entered the kitchen, and Jeff beat Keegan to hold Lizzie's chair as she sat. This looks amazing, he said. Keegan frowned at him. John grinned at Keegan. So, tell me about this house, Lizzie, Jeff said. When did you buy it? Oh, I didn't buy it. I grew up in it. So it belongs to your parents? Well, it did when they were alive. My father died 4 years ago. My mother died this past June. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. They left me the house, and I'm extremely grateful for that, even though it is very old and needs a lot of work. Well, I can tell it's old from the design, Jeff went on. I'd say over 100 years old. You won't find this particular design anywhere nowadays, with the entrance hall wider than a room and runs the length of a house with doors to all the rooms opening up onto the hall. Yeah, it's kind of like a big circle. Before my father took out all the connecting doors, you could go into the front room that's there on the right just as you come in the front door, and without ever going back into the hall, you could go all the way down one side, across and up the other side, and come out through the door that's now Mike's room. I used to skip through the house, rambling from room to room to see how many rounds I could make before my father would tell me I was driving him crazy. You were an only child? John asked. I was a twin, but my sister died at birth. Keegan's brows rose at the news, making him realize that he didn't know nearly enough about her. My father turned the old dining room into a master bedroom, which is now my bedroom, and he thought a formal dining room was a waste of space, since the kitchen is so open and has such a large dining area. My parents used that first room on the right as a formal living room, but I hardly ever go in there. We spend most of our time in the back of the house, in the kitchen and the family room. Obviously, there have been bathrooms added, one in my bedroom and one in the front bedroom Mike is in. The other 3 doors on that side are the girls' bedrooms and a connecting bathroom, which was the original bathroom. Keegan glanced down at the little angel faces, who were being abnormally quiet. Then it struck him. They weren't used to having men around. Except for a brief visit from their father, they had only been taken care of by their mother and grandmother. Men, to these little girls, were a phenomenon. Yet, even though he and John and Jeff were all big, brawny guys, the girls didn't seem a bit frightened. A little awed, maybe, but not scared. He smiled at Lily as he caught her eye. How you doing, little munchkin? He asked softly. Do you like your lasagna? Lily nodded her head and took another bite. Tenderly, he stroked his hand over her blonde curls. She's not a munchkin, Rose said, her mouth pouting. Oh, yeah? Keegan teased. I'm not a munchkin either. He smiled. I know that. You're a pill. I am not a pill, she argued. Really? Well, then you're a... He looked around the table, trying to think of something silly. You're a tomato. Oh, yeah? Rose countered. Well, you're a... She looked around, trying to imitate him. You're a fork. Oh, yeah? Well, you're a noodle. Oh, yeah? Well, you're a salad, Rose giggled. The other girls giggled along with her. Oh, yeah, Keegan said. Well, you're a, he said, pretending to be flustered. You're a glass of milk. Oh, yeah? Well, you're a carrot. A carrot? Keegan asked, his eyes big. Oh, yeah, well, you're a garlic bread. Oh, yeah, well, you're a. Her little mouth pouted while she thought, and suddenly her eyes lit up. Oh, yeah, well, you're a whole dinner. The table at large erupted with laughter. Rose looked around and grinned, very pleased with herself. Well, I guess you win, Keegan said, touching her nose. Now eat your whole dinner. The girls giggled. John watched his friend. Oh, yeah, he had it bad. Once the pie had been served and Lizzie had been complimented over and over for the delicious meal, the men insisted on doing the dishes while Lizzie got the girls ready for bed, and Keegan was implored to deliver a story, which John and Jeff found extremely entertaining. Not the story itself, but the storyteller. If you had known him, John whispered to Jeff, back in Afghanistan, never in a million years would you believe he'd be telling fairy tales to a bunch of little girls. Never. Mike is a trained killer. We all were. I know, but he was always so dead serious. It's good to see him like this. Jeff nodded. He hadn't been a soldier, but he had been trained by Jason Lee, the same man who'd helped to set up training programs for elite military programs. And though Jeff was still young at 25, he was extremely lethal. He'd been involved in several sting operations, and at his tender years, had already killed, some with his bare hands, some with weapons, all with lethal intent. It'd taken him some time to get over the first one. Taking a life, even when the guy had been a low-life scumbag who just finished slicing up his hostage, was not something to get over easily, if ever, and it never got any easier. At one time, Jeff had thought about joining the military or the FBI's ranks, but Ameritech was even better. It was a privately owned company, comparable to the FBI, only no government interference or red tape or politics to worry about. Jeff wanted to be a force for good in the world, and he was happy at Ameritech. When the story ended, Lizzie told the girls to say good night and ushered them off to bed, and Keegan, John, and Jeff made their way to his room, grabbing a couple of chairs from the kitchen as they did. Once in Keegan's room, all lightheartedness disappeared. Jeff quickly retrieved a black leather bag from the car, dropped it on the bed, and took a seat, ready to hear Keegan's story. Keegan drew a deep breath. I've been working undercover 2 years with an organization based in Tennessee who steals children and sells them. Babies, actually, almost all under the age of 1. They made big profits, between 20,000 to almost 400,000 per kid, usually white, usually males. This has been going on for almost 20 years. I've had to walk a very thin line, and it took me a long time to gain enough trust to gain entrance into the big guy's home, Anthony Salados. The first time was this past Christmas during a party. He shook his head. It was like something out of The Godfather. How do you mean? Jeff asked. These guys who have ruthlessly murdered and stolen children from their homes and destroyed families are all dressed up, standing around, toasting each other, their wives or girlfriends hanging on their arms, their kids running around. He shuddered. Anyway, once I got in, I was able to find and document the sale of hundreds of kids. I found records of hits made on anyone who tried to stop them, or even those who innocently stumbled across the truth. One of the most recent, a mother who'd searched for years for her lost son, came across the nurse who'd taken care of her baby during the sale and delivery of the child to the buyer. The nurse, an older woman, was willing to come clean. She never got the chance. She died in a suspicious car accident on her way to a meeting with the mother, and the mother was found raped and murdered in the bottom of a ravine. John cursed, and Jeff sat so still there was no sign that he'd even been listening. Their arms are long. The homicide detective that investigated the mother's death must have gotten too close to the truth. He supposedly committed suicide 4 months later. I found documentation that these were ordered hits and dozens more, and after I tapped the phone lines, I discovered some of those orders came directly from Senator Jack Hartman of Massachusetts. John again muttered a soft curse. I knew he was a close personal friend of Salados. I had no idea he was that involved. I have all their files on a computer chip. I have pictures of stolen kids. I have phone conversations. I have enough solid evidence to bring them all down. Do they know what you have? Jeff asked. They're smart enough to know I have something. I don't think they know the extent. One thing I do know, they won't accept a crispy, unidentifiable corpse as my dead body. They won't let that go if they have to dig it up and verify it themselves. They won't stop until they find me. How did you discover your cover had been blown? John asked. A phone conversation I picked up. Hartman was speaking to Salados and told him someone on the inside had given him some information about Todd Worthington, which was me. Gave my real name, the fact I was FBI, and told him to bury me. While I was trying to get my stuff together and get out of there, Salados placed a call to the men who were at the house where I was staying. I take it they're dead? John asked. It was them or me, and I chose them. What's the evidence? Jeff asked. Where's the evidence? Jeff asked. I buried it. You're kidding. He shook his head. I felt it was the only choice. I was on Highway 78, hightailing my butt back to Atlanta, when I hit a damn deer. The thing was just suddenly there. Giant. It crumpled my car, and I went airborne down into a ravine. I laid under that car for 12 hours before someone found me. Maybe I was being paranoid. I was in so much pain I couldn't think straight. But the only way I could think to stay alive was to hide that bag of evidence. I didn't know if I could trust my superior officer. I still don't. He seemed too anxious to get his hands on the evidence. I had no idea who blew my cover, though I assumed it came from within the Bureau. What else does on the inside mean? Jeff nodded. When did you have a chance to bury it if you were pinned under your car? I did it while I was under the car. I used my broken cell phone to dig a hole by my side. Jeff nodded in approval and admiration. You can find the spot again? Jeff asked, his mind already putting together a plan. I memorized my surroundings. I asked a paramedic what mile marker I was near because I couldn't see one from where I was. He told me mile marker 101. If you can get me there, I can find it. We need to retrieve the evidence, make copies, and get it to the field office in Atlanta. It has to be turned in with at least 3 people present. That way, if someone is in with the bad guys, there will be no way for them to suppress the evidence. John nodded. Who knows you're here? Nigel Court, my SO, at the Bureau, and the agents he's assigned to watch the house, and the doctor at the hospital who arranged for me to be placed with Elizabeth. John sighed. The doctor is at risk. Tell me about it. We'll fix that. Okay, so when we leave here to grab the evidence, we can assume the agents watching the house will tell you. If Court is as anxious to get his hands on it as you say, whether he's clean or dirty, he'll have you followed, Jeff said. No doubt. We can handle that easily enough, Jeff affirmed. Keegan nodded and ran a hand through his hair. Easy enough. Well, I'll be able to rest easier once that's turned in and the bad guys are arrested. Still, that won't be the end of it. There's another problem. Can it get any worse? Much. There's a big deal going down sometime in October, near Halloween. Tomorrow's the last day of September, so we have a month to put something together. Plenty of time. What's the big deal? Hartman and Salados and a weasel named Victor Washington have worked out a deal with members of ISIS to deliver 5 white male babies, all blondes, all blue-eyed. What do they want with babies? Jeff asked. I believe the words were to insult Americans and tear them apart and cut them deep. How much more deep than to take our own children and turn them against us? They want to raise these kids as ultra-terrorists, elite assassins whose number one goal will be to destroy America. Why blonde, blue-eyed babies? We're Americans, not Swedes, Jeff asked. We have every race here. They don't want there to be any doubt where they came from. A child with brown eyes or brown or black hair could be one of them, but not a blonde, blue-eyed child. And from what I overheard, they've already done this. When a child's hair started turning darker as he got older, they sent him on a suicide mission or murdered him and sold his organs, neatly disposing of him. John shook his head sadly. So, these 5 are not the first, and more than likely won't be the last. Oh, they'll be the last for this particular group, Keegan replied. They're scheduled to leave by cargo ship in Savannah the week before Halloween. Needless to say, we have to intercept. If I'd been able to stick around longer, I may have been able to find out which families were about to be destroyed by having their babies stolen, but it just didn't happen that way. For all I know, they already have the kids. Easier to stop them all together rather than individually anyway, John said. How much? Jeff asked. Keegan's lips pressed together. $5 million per kid. Jeff whistled. $25 million, most of which I assume will go to Hartman. For his presidential campaign, Keegan added. Think of it. If he were elected, America would essentially be ruled by Muslim terrorists. Well, that won't happen, Jeff said, his jaw clenched. Keegan smiled a wicked smile. It would be difficult to be elected president using prison as your campaign headquarters. John rose and emptied the duffel on the bed. Guns, magazines, knives, holsters, wires, ammo, rope, gloves, night vision goggles, cell phones, maps were the most notable items. Keegan examined one of the guns, chambered it, tucked it back in the bag. He had his FBI issue in his duffel under the bed, but this one would be for moving day. His issue would be strapped to his leg. Next, he examined one of the two knives and sheathed it and tucked it on the strap and placed it in the bag. He examined each item, placing it in the bag, finally closing the bag and tossing it onto the top shelf in the closet and covering it with a thick quilt. Then they sat together and devised a plan. So, Keegan repeated, to retrieve the evidence, Jeff, you arrive in a TV delivery van and back up to the door. John, you arrive shortly after. I'll walk out with you, John, and see you to your car, and you go off leading the agents on a nice scenic drive. Meanwhile, I go back into the house and ease back out and get in the van. Jeff delivers the new TV, gets in the van, and drives away. Jeff and I will retrieve the bag of evidence, then drop me off in a grocery store parking lot where a car has been placed for me to use. Can you drive with your broken leg? The boot is removable. I can drive. I'll get the evidence into the field office, Jeff said. I don't know that I'm comfortable with you going alone, Keegan admitted. Oh, I won't be alone. Trust me. The evidence will get there. Keegan looked into the eyes of the younger man, and finally he nodded. He turned to John. I have a personal favor, then, to ask of you. Name it. Go to Knoxville, see my parents, and put their hearts at ease. Risky, John said, but doable. I'll work out the details. Thanks, man. Let's get out of here then, John said. Jeff flew in from California. He's been gone for about 18 hours. Where are you staying? Days Inn, out on the interstate? Keegan nodded. Stay alive, guys, he said. Stay alive, John repeated. They clasped hands. Jeff, Keegan extended his hand. Thanks. You have a lot riding on your young shoulders. Well, I can handle it. I have a feeling you can. John and Jeff grabbed their chairs and took them back to the kitchen, while Keegan stood in his bedroom doorway. Donning their jackets, they came back toward the front door, and Keegan nodded and shook their hands. Thanks, guys. John smiled. You the man. Elizabeth came out of her room. Are y'all leaving already? Yeah, we've got some plans, Jeff said with a smile. Thanks so much for a fantastic meal and even better company. Lizzie beamed. You're welcome. Come back anytime. She offered her hand to both men, then stood beside Keegan and watched them to their car. Finally, they closed the door. Keegan turned to her, brushing a finger over her cheek. Are you tired? No, not really. You did all the hard work. Not hardly. Listen, thanks for everything. It was a great evening. She smiled her sweet smile that sent him through the ceiling. You're so welcome. Thank you too, Mike, for everything. My pleasure, he said. Well, good night. She smiled. Good night. She rose up on her toes and kissed him softly. His hands came to rest on her waist. And when she tried to pull away, he held her there, his thumbs moving back and forth, giving her chills. Suddenly, he let go. Good night. He turned and entered his room, closing the door softly. New scene. We have a tail, Jeff said. Yeah, John answered. Let's lose him. It would be advisable. Hold on. 15 minutes later, they were free and clear. Deciding to go low, they ditched the Days Inn's plans, opting for a mom-and-pop roach motel. Tomorrow, they were going car shopping for Keegan's plant car. And that is the end of Chapter 4.